Godzilla Minus One is a 2023 film which is one of few Godzilla movies made in the last 2 decades produced in Japan. This is notable due to how the series used to enjoy near annual releases during the first couple decades of its life. However, one of the reasons the output has slowed down is for this specific reason, I feel. The last 2 entries in the series, being Minus One in 2023 and Shin Godzilla in 2016, both stick out among the entire series as high watermarks, not because of some sort of modern recency bias. It's because there's much more of a stronger focus put on the narrative. The general stigma around Godzilla movies is that they're just guys in rubber suits smashing cardboard buildings. While that's certainly true for some of the earlier entries, that definitely isn't the case with these. These aren't really attached to the series in the traditional sense and act more anthological. They don't have to adhere to any previous continuity or baggage. They both are an origin story of the kaiju, I suppose, but in very different ways. Shin Godzilla has a modern setting, while Minus One is post-World War II. The first time an entry has had a period setting. Both of them for very specific narrative reasons, and they both have to do with one aspect: theming. Here, think of some of your favorite movies, and then think of others in the same genre that didn't hit the mark in the same way. Why is one naturally better than the other? The thing that probably came to mind for you was that the story wasn't as strong. People can forgive other elements if they lack. Effects, acting, and direction to an extent can all be overlooked if you have a compelling story. But the story has to have some sort of narrative theme, a structure of sorts, something that subconsciously resonates with the audience. You can have the most clever script out there, but if you have nothing thematically tying your story together, it won't stick with the audience. People don't praise movies like Fury Road or Terminator 2 just because they have impressive action. It's because they have compelling scripts with strong themes. Minus One is no exception to this. Because when you step back and look at the film, Godzilla's barely even in it. He's probably in like 5 scenes altogether. In fact, much of the movie doesn't even focus on him and instead on the human elements. So if the focus of a Godzilla movie isn't primarily on him, but rather his effects on the characters of the story, why is this resonating so much with people? It's because the core themes of the story stick with you more than any other Godzilla movie before it. Just about every other film in the entry has humans at its forefront, but they're mainly there to give the audience something to identify with. However, what separates these two is how the priority here was on the story versus just the spectacle. The story of each film tackles some sort of theme which is trying to be conveyed, with Shin being a commentary on the inefficiencies of the Japanese government as well as their over-reliance on the US. But in Minus One, which acts as sort of a loose quasi-remake of the first film, it's a commentary on how the former Japanese Empire didn't value life on an individual level. Godzilla himself originally was a metaphor for the nuclear fallout Japan experienced at the end of World War II, which again is when this movie is set. However, the commentary isn't about the bombing specifically here, rather about how the actual war affected the people of Japan. The main character is a kamikaze pilot who gets cold feet and lands at a refueling station, which is then attacked by Godzilla. The pilot has a chance to shoot him but freezes up, which results in everyone's death except him and one other engineer. The engineer explodes at him the morning after the attack, saying everyone's death is his fault, giving him photos of each one who died. Upon his return to Japan, he finds his neighborhood completely leveled. He is condemned by his neighbor, who says that he should have died in the war since he was a kamikaze pilot and should have gone with honor, defending his country. She then tells him how his parents died and he's essentially on his own. While walking through a busy market, a woman who stole some food bumps into him and gives him her baby in a panic. He has no choice but to wait around until the mother possibly returns. When she does, he finds that she has no food or home. Guilted, he invites them to stay with him, which he finds out that the child isn't even hers, rather an orphan child she found. Now, there's a lot to unpack here thematically, but one thing is consistent. As the former Japanese Empire has fallen, so has its cultural view on the value of life. When the engineer blew up at the main character due to his failure to kill Godzilla, he represents the actual feelings of the Japanese people. He didn't mention the greater good of the Empire like the neighbor. He spoke about the other engineers like they were individuals which he grew to have a relationship with. The neighbor, on the other hand, is someone who clearly put her faith in the Empire and felt that if the mentality that there should be death in exchange for the greater good, then everyone who was predisposed to die should have met their fate. The war and the Empire stripped away their humanity. Whereas the main character, who was most likely conscripted, sees the value in his own life. He's human, and yes, his more human flaws resulted in him not shooting Godzilla when he had the upper hand, although it most likely wouldn't have done anything. Clearly didn't identify with the imperial mentality and valued his own life. The reason he was on the island in the first place is because he got cold feet. not willing to sacrifice his life for what was at that point all but a lost cause. He gives shelter to the woman and child because even when he essentially had nothing, he wanted to help. Same goes for the woman, who had even less than nothing. She was still willing to be responsible for this child. The two of them still had shreds of humanity when everything around them was destroyed because it's human nature to want to help one another. He takes a job on a ship getting rid of undersea mines, which even that can be seen as him attempting to preserve life. But later, when Godzilla lays waste to the mainland, we really get a feel for how the script treats him. See, a big difference between the modern American Godzilla films versus the Japanese ones is how Godzilla himself is handled. In the American films, he's written as more of an actual character with thoughts and feelings. But while I'm someone who generally enjoys the MonsterVerse films, I don't think this is the right way to go about it. The Japanese films work because he isn't depicted as a character, but rather an unstoppable force of nature. Godzilla has meant a lot to Japanese culture because of how deeply connected he is to their culture. Again, originally he was depicted as a metaphor for the horrors of nuclear war, which they themselves experienced, so having him be a personification of other issues such as political commentary or critiques of the previous empire is ripe with much more narrative potential. Take for example when later in the film Godzilla is leveling Tokyo. The main character is pushed by the woman out of the way of destruction. Because of a selfless act disregarding self-preservation, something he himself was unable to do, she is killed by the carnage of Godzilla, which the main character believes survived because of his actions. Meanwhile, as the Japanese government was still in pieces and the US was seemingly unable to stop Godzilla, a group of civilians, led by the crewmates of the main character, devise an elaborate plan to kill him by using a series of unconventional means. During this, the main character decides to kamikaze himself as a sort of atonement. He tracks down and recruits the help of the engineer from earlier to fix up a newer plane made right before the end of the war. Later, as they hatch the plan, just as it seems to be on the cusp of failure, he kamikazes himself into Godzilla's mouth, killing him. They all look longingly at what they believe was their dead friend, or so they think. The engineer fixed up the ejector seat, allowing the main character to be saved. Not only does this give the audience a sense of relief that he survived, but it also shows that the engineer, who has every right to despise the main character and would have wanted to see him die, saw the value in the sacrifice he would have made. The engineer didn't want to see him end his life for the greater good because look where it brought them as a country. A complete disregard for life itself beckons the question of what are we even fighting for? For a promise of someone else to live to where they might have to sacrifice their own life someday? Japan had basically nothing as a result of the war, so continuing to die even after the war will leave them with absolutely nothing. Godzilla Minus One is a clear example of how amazing stories can manifest in places that you may not expect. Like I said, the majority of audiences still see Godzilla with all of his B-movie trappings, without realizing that for the second time in a row, you have a film in the series that has as much depth as any acclaimed drama. And if you gave me the choice, I still definitely prefer Shin Godzilla. I can't ignore that this is one of the most respected and revered entries in the entire series. The action was sparse, but the film never let up. Its 2-hour runtime was a breeze to get through. Its characters, while being a bit superficial in personality, are memorable and likable, and the reincorporation here is on par with something like In Bruges. It's no wonder that this film has captured the public like nothing else. At the end of the day, what makes a movie stick with you lays in the strength of its characters, and here it's welded together strong by its themes, which clearly run deep in the culture of Japan.
Up from the depths, 30 stories high,